I just graduated high school. While my friends were taking trips to Mexico or Europe, I decided to fill the tank in my Chevy and head west. Somewhere. Anywhere. I didn't know what would be out there, but I knew it would be an adventure. A fresh start. I told my parents and friends, see you later, leaving West Virginia in my rearview mirror. A few hours down I 65, and I was already on the west side of Kentucky, passing through a town called Princeton when I hit some construction. The interstate was closed, and a detour sign took me down one of the exit ramps and onto a stretch of road that, to my best guess, would take me around the construction zone and back onto the interstate. After a few miles on the detour, I checked GPS, and it looked like it was taking me further and further away from I 65. I had all the time in the world, so I didn't think much of it. I kept going until I got to a split. There was a detour sign pointed to the left side of the split, but the other sign caught my attention more. The sign read, "This way to heaven." Being the new explorer that I am, I didn't mind a shot at getting a little piece of heaven during my travels. It wasn't like I had a specific destination in mind. Anywhere but here was my mantra. I took the right side split without a second thought. I got down a few hills and curves before another sign said, "Getting close, the gates await." A huge incline followed the sign, and after rounding over the top, it opened to a spectacular view of a small town resting in between several mountains, light shining in all the buildings as if they were celebrating Christmas a few months early, or maybe like a lighthouse for people like me who could get lost out here. Getting into town was easy. The main entryway held a huge wooden sign saying, "Welcome to Heaven" in all gold, painted with these winged figures holding clarinets around it. It looked aged and beaten, cracks splintering up, down, and across the wood, a few chunks missing here and there. Another sign read, "Stay a while, stay forever." Didn't plan on it, but I'll check it out, I thought. I couldn't tell from the top of the hill how old the place looked, and my God did it look old. It looked like a bunch of Quakers settled here, and after setting up camp and erecting some buildings over a few decades, it just stopped. Children were playing outside. People were sitting on their porches, watching me as I drove through one of the streets that cut through the middle of town. A man was cutting his lawn with a scythe, and a woman was watering her flowers. Wasn't it night? Why was everyone going about their day like it was daytime? Kids should be tucked in bed, parents and other adults winding down for bed as well. None of it made any sense. Everyone wore similar clothing. Woman wore a very modest red dress with a black linen cap that reminded me of the Pilgrims, while men wore whatever they wanted, typically jeans, a button-up collared shirt, and boots. My truck was conveniently running low on gas, forcing me to pull into a gas station across from a church, where I could see people piling in like it was 8 a.m. on a Sunday morning. This whole place seemed strange, but it fascinated me. Did I find a cult or some secret religious community? The pump was super old, and there was no chip reader, so going inside was a must. The man at the counter gave me that "you're not from around here" look, but was awfully kind. As I pumped my gas, there was chanting coming from the church across the road. Sounded like old hymns my mother forced me to sit through every Sunday sermon at our Baptist church. But something was odd about it. I heard a name I'd never heard before. Out of my own curiosity and the thrill of adventure, I spared a few minutes after pumping my gas to go and check it out. As soon as I opened the double doors, the entire congregation halted and faced me, but after a few seconds continued on with their worship. I noticed there was no Jesus hanging on a cross behind the priest's lectern. The crowd was loud, the sound resonating within the church walls like an echo that got louder instead of dimmer over time. "All hail the whistler of the stars! Praise thee! Glory to thee!" I'd never heard of anything like it. I found a pew amongst the crowd and sat down, staying for the entire sermon. Afterward, a few men approached me, also giving me that look the guy at the gas station gave me, and handed me a pamphlet. On it said, "Congregation of the Whistler of the Stars." I flipped through it real quick and folded it into the back pocket of my jeans. I didn't know places like this existed, and I wasn't in a rush to leave. I actually stayed for a few days and fell in love with the place. I plan to join them, but before I do, they told me I'm to cease all communication with the outside world. That means no phones or electronic devices of any kind. My question is, should I do it? I was driving west on Route 66 toward Irvine, California, when I saw a man in a green poncho thumbing out off the right side of the road somewhere on the border of New Mexico and Arizona. I, obliging to a fault, pulled over to the service lane and took him in. Nobody was looking, it was dark. This would be the perfect moment for him to do some damage and pull out a pistol, wave it in my face, and easily take anything he wanted. But here's the thing, he didn't. I didn't get a clear look at his face when he got in the passenger seat. He shook hands and he introduced himself as David. He got straight to the point. "I'm heading west towards Holbrook, another 15 miles ahead, if you got the time." Car broke down a few mile markers back. This part of Route 66 is pretty dead these hours, so had you not picked me up, I'd probably be walking all night. He gave up a laugh. I didn't remember ever seeing a vehicle on the side of the road. No flashing hazards, that's for sure. But his composure and hospitality came off as genuine. He had this charming quality about him. I didn't think he was dangerous and didn't suspect anything of him. I told him I'd be happy to give him a ride. I put the car back in drive and pressed the pedal to the floor. Off we went. Dropping him off took about 20 to 25 minutes. Most of the ride was quiet and calm. I tried turning on the radio, and as I was jumping through some stations, David requested I keep it turned off, mentioning how much he disliked FM radio and would rather listen to the wind with his window rolled down. After turning off the radio, I figured I'd get to know the stranger a little more since they were sharing the cab of my car with me. "What's waiting for you out in Holbrook? Family? Friends? Some girl?" I asked. He laughed again, then said, "You wouldn't understand. It's complicated." He took out a photograph of what I presumed was himself with his wife and 3 kids. Remember, I still hadn't gotten a good look at his face, as it was covered by his poncho, and the fact it was dark outside. He had brown hair and a pale complexion. I could hardly see his eyes, but they looked like a glossy steel blue. Just a normal-looking guy. And then he said, "I lost them. I guess you can say I'm running from my old life." I showed compassion and didn't pry. All I saw was a man who was missing a part of himself, a man on the search for something out there, meaning maybe a fresh start. I was in that same spot. Girlfriend dumped me, kicked me out in just my underwear with just my car keys. With no family and no friends, I was the most alone I'd ever been. And that's why I was heading for Irvine, California. Nobody was waiting for me there, sadly, but I was used to it at the time. All things considered, I felt connected to this guy, as if he were an extension of myself. For 2 strangers embarking on separate life paths, we had a lot more in common than I thought. The rest of the drive was silent. David pointed towards a Shell gas station across from some train tracks. After pulling over and putting the car in park, we shook hands and I wished him well in his endeavors. I still had a long drive ahead of me, and I didn't plan on making any more stops for another 200 miles. As I pulled off and back onto the main road, I saw him watching me from my rearview mirror until he turned into a speck of nothing. I enjoyed the short company, but I was really missing the radio. Nothing like classy country to get you through a road trip. I turned it back on, and after some Hank William Jr. and Haggard, a news report came on the radio. "Manhunt continues. Wife and 3 kids murdered. Husband, 6'2", brown hair, blue eyes, missing." I was driving to a friend's house the night I lost my mind. It was almost midnight as I was pushing through the rain in my VW Beetle, wipers on high with one of my headlights out. The other was working overtime, and I still had a few miles to go before I'd pull into their driveway. I shoved my body forward, chin over the top of the steering wheel, just so I could see the road that was just above the hood of the car. I was 19 at the time, and still a pretty new driver. I wasn't risking totaling my first, and as my father reminded me the day I got it, last vehicle my parents would ever get me. I'd never been to this friend's house before, and I was still learning a bit here and there on how to get around my hometown. I'd been so used to my mother and father driving around that I guess I never paid attention to where things were. I was reaping my ignorance that night, I guess you could say. The last thing I remembered was a pizza joint sign. "Lost? Come inside and grab a bite." The rain started pouring so hard that even my cell service was spotty. I was relying on the GPS to get me there, but every once in a while, the phone would reset my route. The rain was already bad enough, and before I knew it, I was right back at the pizza joint. The sign stuck out like a sore thumb, as ironic as ever. Very clever, but somehow disturbing. Was I really lost? I followed the GPS down the same road as before, this time paying close attention to the street signs and markers on the side of the road. To no avail, I'd completely circled back to that pizza joint, like something out of the Twilight Zone or Black Mirror. I tried to call someone so I didn't think I was going nuts, but the service was so bad it didn't even go to the voicemail. The call just dropped. That pizza sign just loomed over me, beaming that fluorescent red and yellow. The rain wasn't letting up, so instead of sitting in my car, I went into that pizza place to wait out the storm. When I walked in, one of the girls at the cash register said, "Got another." I didn't know what she meant by that, because nobody ever asked me if I needed anything. Once the storm was over, I got back in my car, turned back on my GPS, and tried again. This time, cell service wasn't shoddy, and I never did come back to that godforsaken pizza joint sign. I still can't explain what happened, but I wonder, has anyone else experienced something like that?